and we'll start in a moment. So this is Finance Meets Real Estate. We have Roger Smith here today. He's the co-founder of TermSheet. I'm really excited to have him. So he has machine learning background and math background, and he has built like a great tool for automating and like facilitating your sort of deal flow and data like for real estate. So he's also working, I believe, on a technology-enabled real estate investing. So that's it'd be interesting to hear about that as well. So with that, Roger, I'm passing on to you. Thanks.
Yeah, cool. No, thanks for that intro. Thank you guys for taking the time. If you're on the East Coast, I know it's sort of a little late. I appreciate you carving a little bit of time out of your day. So my name is Roger Smith. I am the co-founder of TermSheet. We actually recently rebranded ourselves as the first terminal built for real estate, and I'll kind of explain why that is in a little bit. Obviously, sort of a la Bloomberg, that's probably where your mind is going, and that's intentional. But to give you a quick background on me as to why, how I got to where I am today. I shortly after the Jobs Act was passed, I started a company in the real estate equity crowdfunding space called Groundbreaker, and we were building a platform to help syndicate real estate deals. Again, shortly after the Jobs Act, so we took the thesis that we can help sponsors raise capital on this like new methodology. But what happened was we quickly learned that while that was good, people wanted a way to better manage their own deals and their investors. And so we sort of pivoted or transitioned to a white label platform. After that, I was, acqui-hired, for lack of a better word, into a private equity real estate company called Platform Ventures based in Kansas City. And that's where my first real exposure to real estate kind of came. I began to understand how professional real estate investors source deals, manage their deal flow, underwrite deals, and ultimately asset manage those investments. And it was there that I really saw the intricacies that go into real estate. I learned how I could do it myself. But I also was exposed to like how inefficient, even at a firm of that size, which I would call Platform sort of a mid-market firm, how inefficient they were at managing their deal flow. So here you have, a group that's managing hundreds of millions of dollars of other people's money, doing things very similarly to how a person, a 1 to 2 person shop would manage their deal flow. And what we found was that wasn't inconsistent from the 1 to 2 person shop all the way up to the, multi-billion-dollar investment firm. They were kind of all doing it the same. And so we set out to build this platform to use internally called TermSheet to sort of help streamline our deal pipeline within the firm. It was in January of last year, so January 2020. Actually, let me take a step back. In October of 2019, we went to CRE Tech, if any of you guys were there, in New York. My co-founder, Sahil, and I were really just trying to talk to as many people as possible to learn, how do they do it? What are they looking for? Is this a product that other people want, not just that we want? We found out that we could solve, if we could solve a few key problems, like everyone was kind of complaining about the same things sort of consistently. And so in January of 2020, we sort of launched out of that private equity firm into its own company called TermSheet. From Jan of 2020 to really June or July, we worked with a few firms. One of the biggest ones that we talk about is LPC, Lincoln Property Company. They're a large industrial investor. And we work with their team or one of their teams to streamline the platform, understand like what theses did we make correctly, what do we think were incorrect. And then from July until really December is where we really focused on selling this, pipeline management platform, which I'll show you. But what we were hearing time and time again was, I want to better manage my deal workflow, my pipelines, but I also have this other data that I'm consuming, right? I mean, I think the holy grail of tech-enabled real estate is this idea, and I would call it a fanciful idea because I haven't seen it implemented quite yet, is this idea that I'm pulling in this data from all these different data sources, and somehow this like blinking red dot will beep on my map to show me that either this is the market or this is the deal or this is a sub-market that I should be focusing on. And what we found was everyone was kind of trying to do it themselves. They were downloading data sources from other places, didn't really know what to do with them, putting together one pagers, and we're like, gosh, we have built this platform. Why don't we sort of enable groups to ingest that data and consume it alongside their most important asset, which is the deals that they're potentially looking to acquire. And so that's really what we're sort of the next generation of term sheet, what we're working on now, which is this sort of terminal built for real estate, where you can have your deals and you can have your data and you can consume them together to allow real estate investors who maybe aren't engineers to consume the data sort of like the big guys, so to speak, if that makes sense. So I'll jump into a demo. I mean, that's a lot of talking, but I'll sort of jump into the demo and kind of show you like what I'm talking about. So this is actually my own pipeline.
Roger, just to interrupt, like just a quick question. So when you say, let's say using data for, to guide your real estate investing decision, it can be somewhat of a fanciful idea, to have it like in a perfect way where you have like a red light signal, or, to tell you what to buy. But why do you think that is? Is that just due to sort of a variety of investor preferences, or even under a single investor that would be the case?
I think there's a couple of problems in there. One is that there's a lot of data out there, right? So if you think about just publicly available data from Census or BLS, there's data that you can obtain, but it's really difficult to access, right? And leverage, right? So you almost have to be an engineer to be able to download the data and get it in a sort of massive format that you can actually do something with. Mm-hmm. Then of course there's all the paid sources, right? That are in their own sort of silos, right? And you may or may not have a subscription to, but they kind of live in their silos. So you have this public domain data, you have these paid data sources, and then you have your own data, right? Which is based off of the deals that you're doing, or market trends that you may be seeing. So I think that's problem number one, just collecting the data, right? How, where do you do that? And then secondly is, now that you've done that, like, what do you do with that? Like, do you run some sort of nationwide, regression analysis where when you're looking at a new market, you can sort of plug in the labor stats and say like, okay, well, this is the specific submarket I should be looking at. And even within the asset classes, right, they're all dependent on lots of different variables, right? So what I found in my experience at the private equity firm is most real estate investing is just sort of done by gut, right? People talk about being driven by data, but what I've seen is data is generally used on the back end to support a decision, or to give the impression that a decision is being supported, as opposed to actually driving a decision, right? Because most people, when they're looking at multifamily, are looking at things like, schools, jobs, population growth, right? But maybe those aren't the data points that matter for multifamily. I mean, we think they are, right? Like that generally they make sense, but our goal is to hopefully over the long term is allow users based on their own sort of criteria to make those decisions. That's like not a today thing. That's a tomorrow thing that we're working on, but we want to give people the platform to be able to do things like that. Because the big guys, like when I say the big guys, like you think about the Blackstones, the Prologuses, like these big real estate, I mean, they're spending millions of dollars building out data science teams, platforms to data warehouses, data lakes to consume the data so that they can try to get an edge in things like this. The middle market, sort of the enterprise down, sort of middle market to smaller groups, don't have the resources, don't have the money, nor time to do things like that. And so we want to sort of provide, again, our goal is to long-term provide this infrastructure where you can take all these disparate data sets, consume them as a real estate investor to consume them, and then eventually do come at some of those analyses that I think we all are striving for, but haven't quite had success with yet.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, so I'll kind of take you through TermSheet, sort of the pipeline management tool. So, like I mentioned, this is my own sort of pipeline. I tend to look at mobile home parks. So if you're a mobile home park fan, please reach out to me. I'd love to talk. I could talk for hours about mobile home parks and all the intricacies of it. But generally speaking, when we talk to groups, most people we talk to usually use Excel, right? So if that's you, then you fall in good company. Even if the big guys use Excel. And so when we built TermSheet, we wanted to make sure that it had a lot of the flexibility of Excel. So we took some notes from tools like Airtable, where you can define these custom fields. So you can create custom fields. I'll go to Stefan score, and you can create these custom fields based on calculations or whatever it may be. So you might say that the Stefan score for a particular deal looks at the NOI per unit and some other sort of variable within the deal to determine whether this is a deal you should look at or not. And so you can kind of define your pipeline, quickly edit your information there, much like you would expect to do in Excel. We enable groups to have multiple pipelines. This just came out of experience working with, again, a lot of groups where they may look at a multitude of asset types or deal types from equity to debt. And the way you look at an office deal might be different than the way you look at a multifamily deal, and you might want to track them in separate pipelines. So we allow you to create as many pipelines as you want, and then define the attributes that you want to track, for any of those pipelines. Deals have statuses. I'll actually jump here, and so we have this sort of Kanban sort of board view, very similar to what you might expect in a tool like Trello. This is actually a deal I'm looking at now. And then, where we start to, one of the big theses that I mentioned is we're all reliant on third-party data, whether it be, public domain data or, again, paid data sets. One of the goals with TermSheet is some of the data that you're entering is probably some of the most valuable data that you could actually have, yet most groups aren't taking advantage of it. And so how can you leverage, let's say, the average cap rate in a given market to better inform the next time you do a deal in that given that market? Like, I'm looking at this deal at a 7 cap, or, if we're lucky, 5 cap maybe these days. Historically, what have I looked at deals like in this market? So that's where we sort of, jump into this thing called analytics, where, you can kind of, we try to roll up a lot of this data so you can kind of begin to understand. Again, I've looked at 20 deals in the Kansas City market. This is the average bid price, and so forth and so on. So that's sort of the first step we're doing in leveraging your own data to better inform future decisions. I'll jump into a particular deal here. So this is a mobile home park that I actually looked at. And so, we track all the sort of data points that you expect. So when you jump into a particular deal, this UI sort of, is completely customizable. You can control the attributes that you want to track and save the template for sort of that particular deal type. You can track, key dates. So you'll get the reminders, it's a closing date or DD period ends, so forth and so on. We have a CRM built in the system, so you can track, the brokers if it's a seller deal, who's on that particular deal. Let me find the better contact on this deal. We have some notes here, Brian Hummel. So all the deals that this particular contact, in this case, a broker, is associated with, and then any notes you've taken. So oftentimes, like when you're doing, you're calling a broker on a deal, you're going to take notes, right? And so all the notes that you've taken on, speaking with that particular person is tracked. You can email them, and then that email is tracked again. Sort of bringing the contacts and the deals together. Actually, it's interesting that a lot of deal teams kind of don't take advantage of their contacts. I actually believe that's one of the most valuable assets, obviously aside from the deal data, that groups have, because you want to be able to understand, like, who do I know in a particular market, or have I spoken with this broker before, or when I have, what have I talked to them about? We have all the financial data, so you can track sort of, let's see, this one changes over time. Yeah, so you can track pricing over time. So for example, you can see that this price started at 2.25, dropped to 2, came up, ended up at 2.1. That's information that's valuable, because it'll begin to you can understand how your own internal pricing may or may not have changed sort of over time. These are, all these can be calculated fields. So as I change the NOI, the price can change, the cap rates can change. Again, these are all fields that you can kind of control. One of the things we do is we have an integration with tax recorder data, and that, I mentioned the census data. And so when you add a deal, we're trying to, as much as possible, do a lot of the legwork that you would otherwise have to manually do when you're adding a deal. So for example, when I entered this particular address here, 2000 Ridgewood Road, it went out to the tax assessor and pulled in, the parcel ID, when it was built. In this case, it says 1 unit, when the last sale price was, and what it sold for, so $2 million. And then we pull in, things from the census to, the 135 data set with the growth, school with the school ratings, the unemployment data, the permits data. Again, to really give you like a quick overview of what the market around that particular location looks like. And you can actually track multiple addresses. So, again, I mentioned LPC. So when LPC buys assets, they don't buy typically one address. They might have a 50 address portfolio or 50 building portfolio. Now, they don't necessarily track all those addresses, but my point is you can actually track multiple addresses. We allow you to track your offers, so that's pretty important for tracking your LOIs. What did you bid? What did you bid at? What's the status of that particular bid? In this case, my deal was rejected. I think it's going to trade at probably like $3 million, which is crazy. But anyway, I can get into some of the issues around that. But comments. So if you have a team, you can track your comments, within sort of in one central location, as opposed to just emails back and forth. And then any comment you make on any object related to the deal. In this case, I made a comment on the LOI, and the broker responds saying when to sell or wait. So that all will be tracked in one location. You can share deals. So if I
Sorry to
Yeah,
interrupt,
go
just
ahead.
one question. So we had a question on the chat. Are you syncing any public data sets, for instance, recently sold per zip code? I think you partly responded.
Yeah, so we
like
don't
the Kansas,
currently,
for example.
that's actually not a bad idea. We do, once you add an address, we do update the last sale amount and sale price, or excuse me, last sale date and sale price. If and when it changes for an address that you have entered into the system. We currently don't have any analysis around like, recent sales in a given zip code, but that's not a bad, feature request.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So here, what I'm showing is you can share a deal. So, if you, Stefan, if you were looking at a deal and you wanted to share it with, an outside partner or someone, you can actually just share it with them. They would get like a read-only view of the deal. So rather than, downloading the OM and any, underwriting that you may have done, you can just share, this particular link with them, and then they could access, again, in read-only format, some of the data that you've done. It just saves time.
Yeah, that's looks pretty handy.
Yeah, so a couple other things you can create, one pagers based on this data. You get this smart email. So if you get if you get some additional documents from the broker, for example, you can just forward it to this email and it'll automatically be pulled into the files. This is pretty, pretty crazy, or pretty basic, but it helps me a lot, just sort of this back of the napkin calculator. So given a particular deal, it'll pull in the pricing. And so you can kind of mess with, if I did 75% leverage with a 25-year AM, my cash on cash might be, 12.5%. Again, it's not a full underwriting, but it gives you a sense of like, given your debt, where your debt sits, what the deal may look like from a cash flow perspective.
Yeah.
All right, so files, pretty straightforward. You can, as I mentioned, you can email files in, you can upload files, you can view all the files here. So and you saw I can make comments. Multiple versions can be tracked, so that's kind of important if you're looking at a purchase agreement and you're working with someone on a purchase agreement. You can actually track all of the versions in this one location. We actually integrate with sort of all the cloud providers. So if you have a Box account or Dropbox or OneDrive, we actually do a two-way sync. So all of your files within TermSheet can be synced to Box, so that, again, accessible under your desktop, and then vice versa. If you upload a file into your Box account, then that file would also be accessible here. Tasks, again, like tasks are really about, keeping you sort of on point, making sure that if, for example, if you have a due diligence checklist, the way tasks came about is we found a lot of groups were managing their, like, for example, I'll call it the DD checklist out of Word or Excel. And then every time they did a new deal, they'd have to kind of zero it out and then use it for that particular deal. So here you can actually, assign it to members of your team, set dates, have checklists, etc. But then you can actually save this task list as a template. So the next time you do a deal, you can just apply that that template. So let's call it your DD checklist, and it'll just pre-create this entire checklist for you without having to kind of zero out that Excel list. Let's see. Notes, again, is, you kind of saw that in the contacts, but a lot of groups use this instead of what, they might have like their Monday morning pipeline meetings. So, obviously the quantitative elements of a deal are very important, but the qualitative pieces are just as important. I don't know about you guys, but like my experience is a lot of deals tend to come back around. And so it's important to have a centralized place to track thoughts on a particular deal. And so some groups use notes for that. Some people use comments. And so that's really like that kind of what I talked about here is really about the sort of the pipeline management features of term sheet. I'll kind of jump into where we're starting to talk about some of the data elements, but I can take a pause if you have any questions.
Yeah, feel free to speak up or just put questions on the chat, however you guys prefer.
Cool, I can keep going. So this is I'll sort of skip the insights here and come to sheet. So term sheet is not, what I would call an underwriting tool. That was something we had considered at one point, but what we found is it's really hard to replace Excel in that regard. Everyone kind of has their model, the way that they like to do things. And so we thought rather than replacing Excel, let's just sort of integrate with it. And so there's really two ways that term sheet integrates with Excel. So the first is within your sort of admin section, you can create these templates, and these templates can then be leveraged to within a given deal. So for example, I have a multifamily underwriting model that I tend to use, and so I can create these sheets within term sheet. When I do that, term sheet automatically creates these this sort of term sheet, right, where it pulls in all of the data from that you saw on that overview page. So let's see, where is it? So and then I can leverage that data within the model itself. So for example, you'll see this cell is called the term sheet bid price, and populates from the value that I'm leveraging in term sheet. So what that means is as I'm updating data in one place, it's automatically pushing through to my model. And then more importantly, this model is available within your term sheet deal. The second piece is that we actually have an Excel add-in where you can actually bring up your underwriting model within Excel, associate it to the deal once, and then any updates you make to that model will automatically be pushed to term sheet. So you don't have to worry about this sort of double entry data problem where once you get the deal into term sheet, you don't want to have to jump from the model back to term sheet, so forth and so on. With the Excel add-in, we actually kind of do that for you. And so ultimately, again, the thesis is to allow term sheet to become this sort of database of record where you're continuously building up your own data set that, again, will hopefully in the future better inform your decision-making processes for subsequent deals. The next thing I'll talk about is insights. And so, a lot of this data you kind of saw previously, but here we've kind of aggregated it into one location. So again, we automatically pull the 135 demographic data that everyone's sort of used to seeing. We do it also based on zip code. Again, unemployment permits data. We automatically pull the tax recorder data. Again, in this case, there's only one property. If there are multiple, they would all show up there. All show up here on the left. So you can kind of see, again, last sale amount, the asset class. This is all from the tax assessor data. And then lastly, and I think ultimately what I think is the most important that kind of showcases where we're heading is this comps data set. So these aren't actually comps from market deals. These are actually comps from your own, or in my case, my own data that I've entered into term sheets. So in this case, you can see like this is the asset in question. And then you can see based on this particular asset type, which in this case is a mobile home park, the distance from that park, what the asking price was, the cap rate, so forth and so on, to begin to say like, okay, I'm looking at this property at a 7.4 cap. How have I tended to look at similar asset types in the past, and what was the price per unit, et cetera, et cetera. And so we run that job nightly. That's sort of the real sort of peeling back the onion, so to speak, of this data warehousing data lake that we're building, where we're helping groups begin to take advantage of the data that they are entering, as opposed to having to only rely on third-party data for things like this. Contacts, I kind of already showcased that. You can associate our contacts. We have an integration to Office 365. We're working on one for Gmail. So if you authenticate your Office 365 account, we will then automatically sync your contacts from your Outlook into term sheets. You don't have to worry about uploading them. Task is really just sort of an aggregation of all of your, in this case, default pipeline, whatever tasks that it's sort of an aggregation of all your active tasks. And then the last piece that I think sort of, again, talks about like where we're going is what I'll call Parcel Pro. But to get there, I'll show you, I'll go to this particular deal and I'll pull up the view parcel. And so what this is a map view of all the parcel boundaries, 140 plus million parcels across the country and their associated tax records. So in this case, you can see this particular asset, which is the deal I kind of showed you earlier. And if I click into it, I can see all the tax assessor data associated with that particular deal. You can look at the history. So again, from the recorder, comes from the recorder and title data. So you can see, let's see, where's the example? So in this case, it looks like, what is this? They bought it for 2,000, was actually what happened. They got a debt on it, 1.45. And that's actually the reason this was a tough deal, was because that debt had defeasance. And so, they bought it in 2018. So they were already 2 years into the IO period. I think the defeasance was like 600K. And so, anyway, someone would have to buy it for, probably 3 to allow them to get their equity back out, make a little bit of money, and then pay out their defeasance.
You guys use a third-party vendor for the county data?
Yeah, so we actually are a partner with Cherry. Have you ever heard of Cherry?
No.
So it's CHERRE. We're a partner with them, and that's where we leverage our data from, in this particular data set from. And then the ownership is in this case, we do what's called an owner unmask. And so what that means is if the property is bought in an LLC, it will actually unmask that record to kind of show the individual owners. We're working on testing with a few providers, actually getting the contact records for that data. We have we're pretty far down the line with one, but we're just valid. We don't want to show bad data. So we're working on testing that with them. But so that sort of showcases, like, again, the sort of parcel data, and I can click around. So let's see if I don't know, I'll click on this one. You can see I can kind of click around and, get different attributes, whatever, different properties. But that's interesting. But what we think is really cool is when you start to layer on other data sets. So for example, I can layer on, let's get population growth on top of this, and then begin to see, like, where in this particular area is the population growth occurring. As I zoom out, it goes from the census block to the zip code. And so again, you can kind of change the attributes. Again, these are all from the ACS over time, where the darker values sort of represent a higher compounded annual growth rate. The lighter values represent lower. And opportunity zones. You can again look at properties and opportunity zones. But what's real again interesting, I think, particularly in the long term, is when you begin to overlay some of your own data sets. So in this case, we have a client who looks at cold storage deals, and so we actually allow groups to upload your own data sets. So, for example, if you found, I don't know, like we have some clients who do data centers. So if you have a fiber, location data set, you can actually upload it to term sheet, and then you can, visualize this on the map. And this is where the next, sort of milestone or evolution of term sheets going to happen, where we're allowing groups to upload their own data, ultimately be able to manipulate it in terms of edit it, delete and add, and then build maps around it so that they can, you can grab data sets from anywhere you want, dump them into one location, and then build a map that kind of represents the whatever the metrics that you care about when you're looking to acquire a property. I mean, generally speaking, there's a lot of little sort of minor features, but generally speaking, that's sort of the quick and dirty run through of term sheet. We actually have a mobile app that we built called Parceled. So we actually have a website too. So if you go to parcel.co, what I just showed you within term sheet, we actually have available just that particular piece on the web as well as in mobile. So right now our mobile app is only available on iOS. Maybe within the next probably, I would say, couple of weeks, likely it'll be available on Android as well. And what that generally gives you is access to the same sort of data that I showed you in term sheet. Again, owner, sort of tax assessor, title and recorder data, both in mobile and web form.
Wow, that's really cool.
Yeah, so that's my run through of term sheet.
Awesome. Do you guys use for opportunity zones? Do you use also Cherry or a different vendor for that?
No, so for the opportunity zones, we actually went out and just grabbed that data ourselves, and just again, like we've built this, sort of, I shouldn't say sort of, but a data lake where we can just dump files in, and then geocode them, GeoJSON, all that, and then consume them within the map. So we just grab that, we source that data ourselves. And actually, that's how a lot of groups, what we find are doing. They're they're using things like Google Earth to visualize some random data set that they've found. And so our goal is to, again, like I said, to help groups find a home for that sort of data, filter and visualize it, and then hopefully use it to either convert those opportunities into deals that they're looking to acquire, or leverage the data to inform deals that they're looking to acquire.
Mm-hmm. And on the deal pipeline, on the first part, I guess, of your overall work, so what is your biggest customer right now that you guys have?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one that we can talk about public, I mean, we have a fair number of big ones, but they can't, sometimes they're a little hush hush, but I think the biggest one is like I said, Lincoln Property Company. I mean, they're a very big firm. They actually have a lot of teams internally that look at deals not only for their own acquisitions. Again, they're mostly an industrial investor, but they have a lot of teams internally that look for deals for third-party clients. And so that's probably our biggest sort of public client. But we're definitely working with some big names. Like I said, a lot of groups are trying to solve this problem, right? Where not just the pipeline side, but all of it, where I have pipelines, I have this Excel file here, I have mobile here, and then I have this other data set or set of data sets that I'm working with here. Ultimately, what ends up happening is investors make decisions the same way they always have, which is just gut, right? And so we want to ultimately provide a place where, while that still may happen, at least they have a better way to sort of support their decisions. Ultimately, our dream would be where people can leverage all of these data sets that they're doing to build, models, right? For based off of their own data, not based off of some AVM that was only supported by third-party data. So, that's sort of our ultimate grand vision. Obviously, we have a ways to go to get there, but if we can help support the day-to-day, which is all the pieces that go around acquiring a deal, communicating with brokers, signing CAs, underwriting deals in Excel, managing documents. If we can help take the pain out of that, then I think we're in a strong position to kind of ultimately execute on that bigger vision.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. And do you target also retail investors?
Retail in terms of like they only invest in retail, or
No.
smaller
Commercial retail, but just kind of small investors, individual investors.
Yeah, so yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have clients all the way from one person shop to, like I mentioned, LPC. So we kind of go up and down the chain. Ultimately, what we found is that they all suffer the same fate, which is everyone kind of does it the same. We all have to, track our deals somewhere. We even have brokers, who use the platform, generally commercial brokers who, want a way to manage deals that they're finding for their clients, and a way to collaborate on those deals with their clients and better manage their CRM. I say we started, with the focus really on like the small to middle market investor, and trying to give them the tools that we felt the big guys had, but what we learned was they don't have it either. They're doing it the same exact way. I think the difference is the retail investor typically doesn't have access to a lot of the data sources that like a large investor for example, like I wouldn't have access to CoStar, right? Because I wouldn't be willing to pay or able to pay hundreds of $1,000s for access to CoStar, whereas a large investor might. And so part of what we're trying to do is, again, through Cherry, if you have a like a CompStack or CoStar, or I shouldn't say CoStar, CompStack or Infutor, for example, subscription, we can actually enable that data via your subscription through term sheet. We kind of call it the bring your own license model. But for people who don't have those licenses, we're trying as much as possible to give you access to data that maybe you could probably get on your own. Like, for example, the tax recorder data, like you could get that on your own, right? But why not bring it into one place where it's already there? The 135 demographic data, like you could get that on your own. The schools data, the crime data, like those are all things you could kind of get on your own, but like we're trying to consolidate it so that you don't have to spend the time getting it on your own,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes sense. I like that you guys are basically genuinely building a workspace where anyone can sort of manage his own investment process, rather than try to solve the problem of, okay, what is the optimal investment solution for everyone, which seems pretty difficult. And
I'd be interested, like how do you, I mean, you're an investor, like how do you do this today?
How do I, my own deals? Well, I mentioned to you, so I would I would pull all data from public domains, right? And I would basically price it. I would have my script price it up, and I would, I would apply a set of strategies. So I would have, let's say, I think I have maybe 6 different strategies. Let's say if I'm looking at condominium conversions, I want to put that in. If I'm looking at sort of like an income value add, I want to put that in as well. If I'm looking at like a renovation flip, call it, I want to do that as well. If it's simply like an illiquid market also, so like this kind of thing. So like building like a set of strategies, pull in all data, price it on those strategies, you know, sort of spit out a set of tables ranked according to, you know, those criteria. So it's sort of like at least what I try to do is I just try to automate the same exact process I would manually do. And then also I bring in some of the sensors and that data and like try to see, okay, like some of the demographics. So kind of like line it up next to the deal. I mean, that's my approach. That's not obviously that's not like a software platform for, you know, that has been verified against multiple customers' needs. It's more like just serving my needs. So, but that's I mean, that's what we do. It's just, I mean, I think it's just a matter of, for me, is if I have to some of the benefits is, so one is looking at data jointly kind of is a big advantage, right? There's no data-driven approach to looking at single data points one by one, right? Which people do when they look up online. So that's like useless. So you can never be efficient like that. And also I would find like 0 deals like that. So that's like, for me at least. So for me, the only way to do it is this one, just because I could not do it otherwise. I was not successful to do it otherwise. So that's like my approach. Now from there, that's less of you know, like, let's say what you guys do, you integrate like different systems, you integrate with Excel, you know, it's an IT development. You have the visualization, which I think is really, really nice. Like the parcel thing.
Yeah.
I really like that. So it's more, for me, it's more like a model to price use and rank them and get every intelligence process that an investor would have to have it out there. Like,
I think it's funny, like, so sorry, I mean to cut you off, but I think what you're doing is where we are heading. But by what I mean by that is, like, rather than you're going to have some, model, you might say, I'm just going to make this up, but like your score, right? And your score might consist of, I'm again making this up, the walk score, the amount of tree cover in a given location, the NOI per unit, versus other deals, et cetera, and then you rank them, right?
Yeah, sure.
What we want to get to is the platform to allow you to do that, right? So that's what we're trying to get to. Where we're starting is like solving these sort of what I would call it's mundane. They're real problems, problems that generally most people have. But what we want to get to is to say, well, look, we already can pull in all these data sources. We know how to match them based on, whatever the identifiers are. Now, you focus on sort of your model, like the step, the Roger model, right? That you want to score your deals by. We're going to give you the tools and platform to do that. But then ultimately, you have this sort of this platform where you can run the code, or whatever it is, or the cleansing's already done, the matching's already done, and you just have to sort of build your model based on all that data and the deals you're looking at. That's what we're trying to get to. That's like our dream, to get there. So you could say, forget Python or whatever you're doing it in now. It's like, you might still use Python, but you would use it on top of our platform, and you're just leveraging the data that we already have, as opposed to spending your time. As you know, like most data science projects, like, I think what's the stat? Like 80% of them are spent just, getting data, right? So we're trying to remove that part, specifically focus on real estate investors. and giving them the tools to do some of the cool stuff that you're doing.
Yeah, and I think, yeah, that's awesome. I think that's great. I think that's very promising, because at least to me, I could never use like somebody's sort of pre-computed numbers for stuff, you know. It always needs to be flexible, like use your sort of put in your own investor, at least as some feedback from myself as an investor. Like that would be, you know, like you need to be able to put in your own investor intelligence and sort of automate yourself rather than like have other people automate their own intelligence process. Usually it's not transferable. I don't know why. It ought to be kind of that everybody's doing roughly the same thing, but I never feel confident, you know, to kind of actually like use like numbers out from somebody else's model. I always need to put in my own model, and okay, then I can use it. And my model nobody can use too. So I feel it's definitely yeah, I think that's a great way.
Yeah, I mean, even I'll relate again, mobile home park. That's where I spend most of my time looking at stuff. So an example might be, you know, for me, I don't want to invest in park-owned homes. I want to invest in, you know, tenant-owned homes or lot rent only, right? So for me, that ratio is pretty important, because that means the more park-owned homes might mean you have to spend more time managing them. Whereas someone else might be like, oh, well, that's a real opportunity for me. Like I want that because I can, you know, put them on the rent to own program or something like that, where I want to take that risk on, or so that extra work on, or, you know, cost of capital, or, you know, what's your debt look like, you know, or what's the return you're trying to hit. You know, for me, I might be trying to hit a 10 and you might be happy with a 9, you know.
Yeah, agree. Yeah.
So that's why I think, yeah, one model doesn't, you know, sort of one model doesn't fit all. And we just want to provide the platform for you to build it, not necessarily to build that for you, you know.
Awesome. That's
cool.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much. Do you guys have some questions? People are a bit quiet today. It's a quiet February, you know.
Yeah, well, if you do have any questions, or you want to talk about term sheet or data or mobile home parks, you know, definitely email me, Roger at termsheet.com is probably the best way. And yeah, I'd be happy to talk about, you know, your particular needs, you know, hear feature requests, or sort of how we may be able to help you. I definitely want to stay engaged.
Sounds good. And so what about mobile home parks? What is your investment thesis there, let's say, as an investor yourself?
Yeah, I mean, so it's interesting. Like I would say 2 years ago, no one would touch a mobile home park for less than you know, an 8 cap, right? Now, like for example, this one I was talking about, I think it's going to trade for around this price. So, you know, almost 6.4 cap. So I think it's going to trade around 3 million. And that's really where, so you have the interesting about mobile home parks is you have two, you know, there's this, the big investors, you know, like Warren Buffett. I think he's the largest mobile home park owner in the country. They want to invest in big deals, right? Because they have to deploy their capital. There's the efficiencies gained with, you know, multiple lots. And so what's happened is a lot of these, as a result of trying to get yield, right? Because they do kick off, you know, quite a bit of cash generally. You have a lot of these large investors who are buying, you know, what I'll call the parks that are over 2 million. They're really compressing the cap rates down. And then
so the efficient kind of range you're saying is, let's say 2 million plus is where like the professional players are and all that.
That's where I've seen most professional, like funds are coming in. They don't really want to spend any, they don't want to deploy capital. It's just not efficient enough for them to, like, you know, get a 30, you know, lot park, or they can buy a portfolio of them.
Yeah, sure.
And so then you have everyone else. Now, obviously, once you get over 1 million, you can get, you know, Fannie Freddie debt, right? Which has better terms, better AM periods. But when they underwrite a park, they're only looking at the amount of lot rent. That's why park-owned homes are a little bit harder, because while the NOI might be good, right? And so the price reflects that.
Mm-hmm.
When you get debt, they're only going to lend you on the NOI that comes from lot rents, right? And so your debt, you might have to deploy more equity. So instead of like a 75 or 80 LTV, you might have to do 50 or 60, because they're only lending on the lot rent. And so that makes it harder to get debt on those parks. So everyone who's below that, let's call it $2 million range, you know, there's a gap between the people who can spend, let's call it 300, and the people who can spend 2, because you can only get so much debt on them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, and so
quite an interesting dynamic there. So.
Yeah, and so but what happened? What you see is a lot of parks have been owned for generations, right? And so they want to get the capital out. They need money for medical bills, or just want to cash out because everything's so hot. So what you'll see, like I'll actually show you. So this particular park here, so you can see based on census data, this is bought in 2014 for $450K, right? So they're asking 1.1. So my question was, well, where do you get 1.1? Because typically on mobile home parks, there has to have been some sort of value add component. Did they raise lot rents? Did they, go from park-owned homes to tenant-owned homes? Did they bring in more homes? Did they fix property management? Like some sort of component where they've shown the value. And I asked the broker, how do you get from 450, 6 years ago roughly, to 1.1? What did they do to the park to increase the value that much? And the answer was, cap rates are low. This is what we think it's worth now. So it's like, this is what's happened. Like before, again, you'd be like, no way, it'll never happen. Now people are looking for yield. So it's really hard to find parks that, and the fact that it's hard to get debt on them. Parks like this sometimes are hard to trade because either you have to put up a ton of capital or equity to get it because it's hard to get debt on it, or the price is going to have to come down,
But you got into more mobile home parks versus multifamily, let's say, due to higher caps initially. That's your main.
Yeah. I kind of want to be out. I didn't want to be in just because of my nature of I don't have a ton of time to manage it. It's like, can you sort of still take advantage of the cash flow while not having to manage toilets and all that kind of thing. The downside with parks historically, although this clearly doesn't prove it, is that generally you don't get a value, an increase in NAV, right? Like typically in apartments, you can underwrite the NAV, let's say 2% every year, as well as the income you're generating. With mobile home parks, you tend not to get it, or historically didn't get it, unless it was in some location where the people were moving to, right? And as a result, the land became more valuable. And so that's the only downside. Unlike an apartment building, the value will likely increase. And it's a hard asset. Land is like, the land, if everyone left your park and you're left with a piece of land, what's the value of the land? Probably not a lot, unless it's in a good location,
Sure, that's true. Okay, well, that's great. Yeah, thank you so much. That was an awesome presentation. I really like your platform actually myself. So that's great. Thank you so much. So for everyone, we are also on YouTube, so you can subscribe to our channel there, Finance Meets Real Estate. So there's going to be a recording on YouTube of this video as well. So thank you so much. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, guys. Have a good night. Thanks for your time.
Have a good night.
Bye.